Thank you so much for inviting me to this platform. It was a very interesting conversation, or I was seized by Johan and Prof. Liesel in the email, and they were talking about me. So they said, yeah, I need to come and present. Sorry. So I'm going to present and advocate for biometeorology today, or actually this evening. I will present on studies that already have been done in a South African context and African context, also globally, what we see. And then also I'm going to present on some of my work that I'm currently doing, especially on my last publication, the Spatiotemporal Characteristics of Human Thermal Comfort across Southern Africa. And I believe everybody on this platform fits actually in biometeorology. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope I can make you excited about the discipline. So what is biometeorology? So biometeorology is the interdisciplinary science studying the interactions between atmospheric processes and also living organisms. So the main question that we ask is, how does weather and climate impact the well-being of all living creatures? So plants, animals, and also humans. So in the Society of Biometeorology, we have different research disciplines or subdisciplines or study areas. So we divide it into natural resource production and management, stress, morbidity, and mortality in animals and humans, and also the potential impacts of human-induced climate change. Then the built environment, that is heat waves, or actually heat waves, but more specifically was going on the urban heat island. Then we look at phenological events, and then also economic systems and social activities. So just for interest sake, the Biometeorology Society was founded in 1956 at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, and also interestingly, it was founded by a geologist and meteorologists and several human physiologists. So it is a broad spectrum of scientists that come together under this or in this discipline. So I'm going to touch on some of the studies that's already been done in the South African context and African context, but mostly focusing on studies that have been published in the International Biometeorology Journal. So first off, I know most of you know what's the jacaranda tree. So in Johannesburg or Gauteng, about 16% of the land in Gauteng city region is planted with trees, forming one of the world's largest and most dense vegetated man-made urban forest. And in Johannesburg alone, there's almost more than 10 million trees in Johannesburg. So in the 1920s, especially jacaranda trees in the 1920s and 2030s, these trees started to bloom in mid-November, but gradually over the decades, the date of bloom has been advanced through October to early weeks of September. And the study that I'm referring to also looked at the time period 1972 to 2019. And what they found was that currently we are seeing advance of 2.1 days per decade. So the blooming days of these jacaranda trees. So it is mainly they correlated, or the relationship they attributed to the warming temperatures, and also the rainfall changes and over time. Then next up, we have also the Namaqua landaces. Most of you will be familiar with Namaqua landaces. It's a huge tourism attraction when this phenological event occurs. It's a world-renowned event, and with this specific study, data was collected from when the first flowering was recorded, full bloom and end of bloom dates. So what they recorded over from 1935 to 2018 is that the first flowering phenology event advanced at rates of 2.6 days per decade. Also, the full bloom is advancing at a rate of 2.1 days per decade. So this advance of days is driven by increasing temperatures that we are experiencing. Then next one, what is also very fascinating for me is flowers or floral wedding events. So there was a study been done in Cape Town and also in the Fourierburg area, Limpopo. So it was more of a question towards the wedding venues. So do they know about, or actually the climatic changes that are happening, and how does it affect the flowers when the flowers that they use in the weddings? So it was more of making aware of the wedding venues, aware of these changes or possible changes that is changing, and they also need to adapt to the changes that's possibly going to happen. Then also, I believe all the people in Johannesburg will maybe be already seen this. So white butterflies are flying, filling Johannesburg skies earlier than usual. So this was a article, a news article that was published. So there's an annual migration of around 80,000 to 150 butterflies from South Africa's Kalahari region to Mozambique. So it also passes through Gauteng. So they are leaving the arid Kalahari in search of food and moisture. So it takes a week or so for most to move through Gauteng. And what was found is that the arrival dates advanced by 2.9 days per decade over the past century, from mid-January to mid-December. So also what happened in 2002 and what was recorded is that they actually early arrival. So they arrive earlier than expected. So this also what they found was that the warmer conditions led to this earlier arrival in Gauteng, and they predict that the timing will change in the near future, in the next decade or so. Then if we look at the, oh yes, and sorry, also that there's a strong relationship that they found between minimum temperatures, so the temperatures that's increasing, and also precipitation in December. Then a very interesting, or also a great event that we all know in South Africa and globally is the sardine run. So there's an annual winter migration of sardines northeast of northeast of the summer spawning grounds on the Agulhas bank of the coast of Durban. So what the researchers looked at to see when looking at through documented newspapers and also fish industries, when are they arriving? Are they arriving later? And also what kind of climatic events play the role in possibly in this migration. So what they found is, so the first arrival dates of sardines reveal a 1.3 day per decade delay over the time period 1946 to 2012. So they also linked it to sea surface temperatures, but there was poor association with sea surface temperatures. And then also what they presented in the studies, arrivals in Durban corresponds with the number of mid-latitude cyclones. However, it's also stated in the study that there needs to be more research done in this context. But what they also concluded is the strength of the run is actually associated with the El Nino, of the Enzo, the oscillation. So we need to look at different climatic factors also of these phenological events. Then if we move to more domestic animals, studies that have been done, dairy farming, it's important that we look at our livestock. This includes cattle and sheep. So what studies have been found is that heat stress, but not only heat stress, cold stress also plays a huge role and is a challenge in our modern day dairy farming. It can impact the cow's welfare, health, and the production. What's interesting that they found that if the ambient temperatures of 29 degrees have been reported to reduce the milk yield of dairy cows by 23%. So what the researchers or some studies suggest is, and I know some of the biometeorologists in Australia already look at some mitigation factors to assist during these hot events or hotter summers. So they use shade to improve the milk yield. Also, they have some of them actually have like use also fans, or they can use like a windsock, so like they create like an air con for the cows in the pen, so to assist with the heat stress of the cows. And then the other option also is to give them high nutrition feed in that specific or when there's cows experience some kind of heat stress, if there's during the summer, for example. Then giraffes, the study that I found very interesting, one of my master students also looked at. We worked with Professor Deacon at the animal agriculture department. So they collared a few giraffes in the Rooipoort Nature Reserve in the Northern Cape in South Africa. So a spanning of 1 year, I believe, and I can be stand corrected here, but it's the longest time period or time span that a male giraffes will collared. So what we did in this study is we looked at heat wave days. So that is when the temperatures in that specific area, there was a weather station in that specific area. So if the temperatures are above 90th percentile, so we decide if the temperatures are above 33 degrees over a span of 3 or 4 or more days, that we identified those as our heat wave days. And what we found was that during that days, females traveled shorter distances and get close to water sources. And then also compared to the males, they walked longer distances during the extreme heat wave days. Then also a very interesting study, also that not study, but event that took place, and I believe so relevant to what's happening globally, is the elephants, the Chinese elephants, and I don't know if you followed the news, but the elephants in China that walked out of the nature reserve in March 2020 to September 2021. So 15 Asian elephants walked almost they walked 500 kilometers out of the nature reserve into populated areas, destroying a lot of different villages, forest patches, and walking into the edge of the Kunming population, the city with 8.5 million people. So what drove, and what some scientists suggest what happened, was that the shrinking habitat, increasing human conflict, and also what occurred in that specific nature reserve, or actually in China as a whole, there was extreme droughts and heat waves recorded in China in that specific year. So that was one of the suggestions or for the movement of these animals. Then also the biometeorology, we're not focusing only on animals, but we also look at people, so the mortality rate and how the climate may influence us as humans, and also the human health. So the specific study that I'm just going to talk about, they focus or try to determine the start and finish date of the flu season in South Africa. They used public sector hospitalization data and private sector data for all 9 provinces from 2008 to 2019. And what they concluded is that the flu season commences in May and then also end in September. So there's a 19-week flu season, but also they state that there still needs to be some more research on this, and what also each geographical location also had different results. So there was the overall results of the study. Then we're all acquainted to our outdoor workers and the heat wave in January. So this is just a title of one of the many news reports, outdoor workers, Walt in rising heat. So we all know about the heat wave in January 23, and we all see the heat waves that are occurring in the Northern Hemisphere now in summer. They already stated that some of the heat waves are stronger than previous years. What happened during this heat wave? There's, especially for the outdoor workers, 8 people have died due to heat stroke in the Northern Cape. And the specific farmers in that area are to mitigate this occurrence, or to just the human health, look at the outdoor workers. They are adjusting their times. So over specific, when maybe 1 o'clock over the warmest period, they will take a break and resume on a different time. So also what is happening, so there's also no legislation or guideline in South Africa for outdoor or protection for outdoor workers, or legislation against the sun. And we can also turn it around to outdoor workers in the winter period. We can't take that also away. Cold stress is a thing, and we see this now in Cape Town, especially. Then just some infrastructure, or in schools, what's happening in schools, and that studies already reported on. So we, especially in informal settlements, we need to create an environment for healthy learning to support our children. This specific study looked at a period of between June 2017 and May 2018, especially in the Eastern Cape. And what they found is the mean indoor range between 11 degrees and 30 degrees. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit in a classroom where you have temperatures of that. Also, what's interesting, and I know this, some of the schools, especially here in Bloemfontein, even if it gets too warm, especially in the summer periods, when there's some sport activities, they cancel some of the sport activities so that the learners are not exposed to the heat in this event, in that specific event. Then also that leads me to the next one, is sport events. So especially the comrades, we all know about the comrades. So what there was a study done in 2020 on the comrades. So what they found in the comrades, so there's increased risk of heat stress. I will speak about that now when I get to my own work. Also, historically, this specific event was held before the start of winter. And what they found was that there's very strong to very strong heat stress that they found in the 2020 comrades. So they are deciding currently if they are or moving the event maybe even later or earlier in the winter for the runners. And then also what we also need to take note of, and what my research is all about also, is what about the spectators? So there's a lot of the spectators watching this outdoor event, standing there in the sun for a lot of hours. So what is the heat stress and exposure to heat stress on these spectators? So the paper that I published or co-authored with Dr. Sarah Rowe and also Professor Jennifer Fidget is looking at the spatiotemporal characteristics of human thermal comfort across Southern Africa. And I believe this is more relevant now in these days, especially what we've seen now, what's happening in Cape Town. So cold events, and then also the heat stress with the extreme temperature events like our cold, like heat events are increasing over Southern Africa, and actually globally. So we need to be prepared to these changes. So what we did for this specific study, we looked at Southern Africa. So we know, we already know the climate is changing, but we don't know what to expect for the future. So what we did is we used this different indexes, biometeorological indexes developed to measure the heat stress of people, even animals. So what we used is the Universal Thermoclimate Index. This specific index use the input data is air temperature, radiation, humidity, and then also wind speed. Then this model or index assume that you're a healthy adult. So there's definitely room for maybe improvement on people with disabilities or diseases. And then also this index assume that you will be clothed in this to the relevant conditions. So if it's cold, you will have a jacket on. If it's warm, you will have a short on, t-shirt, etc. So then we get these different categories. So slight or no thermal stress, slight cold stress, moderate cold stress, moderate heat stress, and so forth. So what we did, we used the ERA5 reanalysis data, so that this is a gridded data set for the whole globe and it's freely available. And we looked and evaluated the heat stress and cold stress for the period of 1979 to 2021. We looked at the daily maximum and minimum temperatures. And also we looked at the, specifically if there's a correlation between the El Nino and La Nina. So what we found for cold stress and heat stress, so this is just a figure, so the frequency of daily, so given that it's gridded cells, so frequency of daily gridded cells. So what we found, as you can see clearly with, we experienced in 2015 and in 2016, we experienced a heat wave. And so we can see there a peak with the heat stress. And similarly in 2018 and 2019, where we see a relative fluctuation of cold stress over Southern Africa. But if we look at it in spatially, we can say the UTCI, there's not no thermal stress for Southern Africa, except for slight cold stress in our high-lying areas. For instance, in Lesotho, Drakensberg region, and with a moderate heat stress to the north. This is the annual results, but if we look at the seasonality of the UTCI, we can see a clear seasonal pattern. So with summer, we can see there in Namibia, there's a bit of moderate heat stress. Then we move from autumn to winter, your high-lying areas in autumn, and then winter, almost the whole country with slight cold stress and moderate cold stress. And then also what's interesting is the slight cold stress that we experience again, even in spring for some areas, also on the more high-lying areas. Then we further evaluated the trends. So the trends over a specific period, if it's significant or did it increase or decrease. So we can clearly on an annual basis, all the dots, you will see that's a significant increase. So what we can say here, that the majority of the country experience significant trends. So significant increase in of 0.2 degrees per decade, up to between 0.1 and 0.3 degrees per decade increase. And for some areas, especially northern regions of Namibia, we can see a bit more of 0.5 or between 0.4 and 0.5 increase over the decade, degrees increase. If we look at it in a seasonal manner, we will we see a clear seasonal shift over the decades. The majority of the country experienced significant increases up to 0.3, 0.4. Autumn, also you can see more on the western coast, we can see there the increase is significant increase. Then winter, what we expect, this is 0.1 increase there with no significant increase in cold stress, and then of colder events, and then also spring, we can see there's a clear significant increase almost across the whole of all of the country. Then we move to the composite analysis of El Nino and La Nina. So we compared that to the UTCI, and what we see, there's a strong correlation between the El Nino and heat stress, especially in Namibia, and even so in our La Nina year. So we took out the strong to very strong El Nino years and correlated it with the UTCI, and these are the results. So whereas with El Nino and La Nina, if we look at the cold stress, the bottom figures, we can also see the higher lying areas, almost similar pattern that we have with slight cold stress that we experience. So what I want to end off, and maybe it's a very short presentation, but one of my final words is that we need to do more research as a collective in the biometeorology field, and it's our responsibility to do this and also inform the public on what is happening. Hopefully they can see what is currently happening with our climate, and what it's changing, season changing, events are changing. And yeah, we need to do something. The plants, animals can't do it. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So now we're going to move on to the question and answer session. And please, if you want to ask a question, make use of the reaction tools or just wave at me. I'll definitely see you. So yeah, anyone want to start off? Oh, there we go, Neil.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was just wondering, I know that the climate models that are being produced are becoming more and more accurate in terms of predicting future climatic events, especially with global warming accelerating and so on. And do you have input into these models with your research?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, so I know the predictability, especially getting better. Some of the models we put in certain variables and then it gives us a result. So especially, or maybe we can look into that to incorporate it better in our research. And we actually, if you think about it with our the different indices that we use, it is kind of a modeling that we are doing. So I think, especially in a South African context, we can maybe look at more specific variables that maybe can influence the model. So I believe, or more particularly to South Africa, so I believe we can do it. I personally did not do it. I know of all other colleagues at the ARC that's busy doing the modeling. So yeah, but it's possible.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Adriaan. Any more questions? Hands up. If not, I'm going to move to the chats. Oh, there we go. Andy.
Oh, yeah, I've always pop up with one. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Adriaan. That was really cool. And it's a pressing issue. And this question's prompted by a good podcast I heard today, which was all about communication and climate change. When it comes to getting this message out there, I think one of the problems we've always struggled with is that sort of scientific language translating into, stuff that, pretty simple folk like me can understand is a challenge. Have you considered employing marketing people to help get the message out in a way that people can grab? You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, no. So actually, my PhD supervisor is a very keen to get keen to get the message out there. So the platform that we usually use is the conversation, and also podcasts. So to get the information out there more on a public level, and I'm always keen on doing that, because sometimes our papers that we write are so scientific that the public can't understand what we're saying. So if we can just, I don't want to say dumb it down, but just make it more relevant, or not to scare them, but but just so definitely, we need to do that more. Everybody, all the scientists,
Thank you, Andy. You're anything but simple-minded, Andy. And brilliantly, Andy is from the UK. You said Adriaan brilliantly, Andy. Well done. Cool. Let's move to the Mark Lottich, the chat section. Very interesting. Thank you. Could you comment on the climate niche, please, Adriaan?
Sorry, what do you mean with the climate niche?
On the mark, are you still in? Then we can ask you if you want. There we go. Oh, goodness. Apologies.
I can try. I hope it's not too loud in the background. I'm on the move. I came across a concept or an idea of a communication idea, maybe, that describes the bandwidth of temperature, of global temperatures, in which we as humanity and the nature around us during our existence have existed, and has defined that corridor that is quite narrow as the climate niche. And I find it personally actually quite a good point of reference, because when we talk about increases or decreases of temperatures or deviations by 0.3 degrees or 0.6 degrees, I personally find it very difficult to actually make any sense of that in a practical sense. But when somebody says that a temperature change is moving us out of the climate niche, let's say outside the corridor of what we have seen over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years, maybe even up to 2 million years, then clearly it becomes very tangible that something is going on that is shifting. So I was just wondering whether you have essentially benchmarked some of your work against this corridor or the climate niche.
Thank you for that explanation, Jona. So no, not yet, no. So my core focus, or what I enjoy doing, is looking at the extreme temperatures. So we need a benchmark to evaluate why do we say that is extreme. So I will definitely take that in consideration. Yes, climate niche. Thank you so much.
There is an article, and it actually may be on the conversation, and I'll try to find it, and I'll send the link to Ruan, who can pass it on.
Oh, thank you so much. I will appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Can I just add another point, because thermal comfort is a little bit of a hobby of mine. I've come at it from a completely different perspective, but I think the issue of thermal comfort, which you talked about, I've seen being framed in like the 3 Ps as physics, physiology, and psychology. And you haven't touched on this very much because you talked about nature, but I guess in the human environment, the physiological consequences of changes in temperature and that interrelated with the psychological play an enormous role in how we actually perceive our thermal comfort. Is that something you can also detect across, let's say, non-human species?
Very good question. So I know of researchers that looking into that. So linking extreme temperatures, especially extreme heat, to mental health. So what is the effect thereof? So I'm not a specialist, and there's a lot of different specialists. I know I attended the conference last month, and they especially focus on the physiological part of it. So that's a very interesting field, but I'm not looking into that specifically.
If I may, very last one, have you looked at the let's say nighttime versus daytime temperatures?
So that is also in the pipeline, because that makes definitely a huge difference, because if there's an extreme temperature event, for instance, a heat wave, you have your day that is warm, your night that is warm, so your body doesn't cool off. So that can also lead to a lot of stress. So yeah, but that is also a follow-up study that I want to do. Yes.
Now, as a researcher, you will obviously not want to speculate, but if you had to sort of volunteer, let's say, just an informal guess that obviously will never be on record, would you suspect that the trends you've observed are actually affecting more nighttime or more daytime temperature, meaning specifically what you just referred to, that it's the cool down periods that are disappearing more than actually the heat exposures?
Yes, so I would say that the daytime temperatures are increasing.
Okay.
Lovely, wonderful. Marty, my colleague, screen's all yours.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Adriaan. It's all, as you say, a lot of graphs and trying to kind of understand everything well. I mean, there's places like Sutherland, for example, where I think they have the record lowest and highest, and I'd be interested in, you know, that sort of specific one place. Has that sort of window moved, or has the lower temperature stayed low and the higher ones just gone higher, or have they kind of both expanded? Because, you know, often people used to talk about global warming, but I think the term of climate change is more appropriate, and I think other people have called it climate weirding and various other things, that things become more unpredictable. So, you know, rainfall would be spread over a lot of time, and then now it's suddenly intense, you know, 100 mils in an hour sort of story. So, I mean, the temperature side of things, I don't know, do you look at like specific extreme places and monitor them, or is it sort of the general? Because your graphs weren't, I mean, the maps were of all of the country, and but sort of which places are you looking at? Every single place in South Africa that has a weather station, or how do you actually get the data?
So very good question, and I'm actually busy, one of my students are busy with that. So the grid data sets that we use is as a resolution of 25 kilometers. So what we want to do, its next step is look at the weather stations located in South Africa and do a comparison between them and the grid data set. So we need to do that kind of ground truthing, if I can say, if all the data set, the grid data set, overestimate or underestimate these events. So that is also in the pipeline. Our problem, especially also, but with the weather stations, is the South African Weather Service. We need to sometimes buy our data, and sometimes they also, but I think most of you know this, or if they just move a station, they delete the data. So there's a lot of data gaps. So they delete years, and I don't know why, but yeah. So, but that's also a good thing, good question, and I think to maybe take on further for specific locations. Then look at specific areas where there's, for instance, Sutherland. But I like the point that you made, and I believe hopefully public also will take note of this, is that what's happening, the climate is changing. We are experiencing climate variability, and some of the places will get maybe warmer and experience more heat waves, but maybe with certain areas that did not even experience heat waves previously will now experience extreme events like rainfall or heat events. So I like that point that you made.
Just sort of another side, I mean, you're looking specifically at temperatures, but not necessarily on rainfall, but I mean, they all have an impact on each other. You know, if there's colder temperatures, typically it doesn't hold as much water and moisture in the air and all of those sorts of things, and it starts affecting the water cycle and everything. So it has a massive knock-on effect. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Ron, please. There we go. You're unmuted.
Thank you, Adriaan. Just going back to the ground truthing aspect, I think that is so important. I'm in Angola running National Park, and we were, because I think that climate has well, it's obvious to me, a huge impact on the management of the park, the rainfall, especially where we are, the dew, because it's a semi-arid area, an arid area. And I put a Davies weather station I've been monitoring since 2002. Up until then, they'd been using the weather station at Luanda Airport, which is about 100 kilometers to the north. And I found there was a major, major difference between our rainfall, humidity, temperature to Luanda. And I don't know if, because people generally think of ground truthing with things like Stevenson screens and stuff, but Davies is it's a very simple computerized weather station, and it's relatively cheap, and you can link it up to your laptop to any sort of device, and it gives you everything from humidity to barometric pressure to wind, rainfall, wind direction and stuff. And I think if we can get more ground truthing and more people realizing that actually it's not so difficult to record these things, I think, and also I've been battling with the Ministry of Environment to have weather stations put in all the national parks. And I'm hitting a blank wall, I'm hitting a brick wall, because they say, oh, well, what's that got to do with running a national park? And I say it's got everything to do with it. So perhaps people need to know more about the technology to gather the information. It's not that complicated anymore. Any comments on that?
No, I agree with you there. So with the greater data sets, it's easier for especially areas, high-lying areas, mountainous regions, to maybe get an idea what's happening there. But I agree with you. We need to have more weather stations so that we can then do a ground truthing and see if the greater data sets overestimates, or what's the difference between the two.
Right. Have you had any experience with Davies weather station? You know, you obviously know of them.
I know of them, yeah.
Because they're relatively cheap and they're very accurate. And as long as you keep them with the power supply, and you can use solar power and you can use batteries, and so as long as you keep them on all the time, otherwise you lose the data if the power goes off. But they really are something that we need to promote for the ground truthing. You don't have to have sophisticated, well, it is sophisticated, but it's simple.
Yes.
Simple to use.
Thank you for that. No, it's definitely a point to consider. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I just wanted, Marty, before you start, I just want to point everyone to the chat section. More kindly posted the link to the climate niche article that he was talking about and asking questions. Marty, all yours.
Yeah, cool. So it's kind of linked to what the discussion was about. Just what sort of density of ground truthing would you feel is necessary? I mean, I think you were speaking about, 25 kilometers, etc. I know from where I stay, there's a couple of guys in the local community, and even within 2 to 3 kilometers from each other, the amount of rainfall varies like so much. You wouldn't expect it. You say, no, your thing's broken, or no, your thing's broken. You don't know how to read a rain gauge, and it's actually so variable. So I kind of wonder, I suppose everything comes back to averages, and then that in the same breath, how amazing it is. An annual average almost stays very close from one year to the next, and maybe there's a lot of rain in the whatever, April one year, and then it makes up for it in October or whatever. But yeah, it's so variable. So yeah, but how close and what sort of density do you need to say that your information is accurate?
That's a good question, because yeah, no, I come from a farm in the Eastern Cape, and our neighbors were just 20 kilometers away from us, and we received different rainfall. So a lot of climatologists, they have also different techniques on calculating that. So some of them say that a distance 50 kilometers is fine, or 100 kilometers is fine.
All right, Adriaan, I've come across all sorts of conversations about the remote monitoring of various elements of biodiversity. And is that something that you also use? Because some of the people I've talked to, they can go down to 1 hectare granularity, apparently without any big effort.
Yes, there's those kind of data sets. I know PlanetScope have that kind of data, but I don't know specifically what level of resolution they can get. But I believe it is out there.
And in this context, obviously, I mean, there's now a conversation going on about somehow quantifying biodiversity in order to attach an economic value to this. Let's say to attach an economic value to living nature. Is that something where the climate models or the temperature changes or biometeorology that you're working on actually interacts with the biodiversity? And just to be clearer about why I asked the question, all of these credits and the economic valuations of them are particularly interesting if one can connect changes in biodiversity to human behavior, because then one can actually create the incentive causality, the proper causality in behavior. But if biometeorology gets in the way of all of this, then we all face a real problem, because over 10, 15, 20-year timeframes, everybody may be doing the right thing, but then the biodiversity degrades because of effects that are completely outside of the acting people.
Good question. Especially, yeah, almost, yeah, no, it's a good question. And I don't have an answer for that one. I will definitely need to think about that and maybe come back to you on that point.
There's lots of homework, obviously.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, there's a lot of homework.
We need more students to do more projects.
Yeah, yeah, I'm still young and upcoming, so yeah, no, definitely. I will maybe ask the more experienced guys to look into that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. As always, lovely. Anyone else?
Thank you. Just in replying to Mark, measuring biodiversity is my specialist field of interest as a ecologist, and it's really at an early stage. There are very advanced ways of determining biodiversity and a wide range of measures, including eDNA, remote sensing, but I think we're yet to come up with a holistic model or way of assessing biodiversity. And I think that's the current focus, is to be able to do that. And in relation to putting a price on nature, that is a very difficult challenge, And in terms of ecosystem services, for example, we can quantify that to a certain degree, but quantifying nature and putting a value on it is extremely difficult. And that's also a point of focus at present.
Cool. Thank you, Neil. It's good to know. It's good to know. It's good to know that science is still going out and still going strong. Look, Mark, maybe a last comment from you, commenting on what Neil said, and then I'm going to call it a night.
Well, it's actually maybe a request, because if Neil knows something about the attempt to quantify living nature, then maybe that would be a really useful talk, given that this is such a contested topic at the moment, and also really in the focus, as far as at least I can tell, a whole bunch of finance and consulting and tech people who are all, this is a little bit, who are really very keen to come up with something in order to have a tradable financial product. So they're searching hard. And if somebody could present something about what the actual situation is, I think that would be really helpful for everyone.
That's true. Noted, Mark. We'll definitely look into it. Thank you very much. And then with that, I'm going to call it a night. And Adriaan, thank you very much for joining us. You're part of the family now. It's wonderful to have someone from my alma mater giving a talk on unlocking nature. It's wonderful. Enjoy Bloemfontein. It's incredibly cold, I know, having spent most of my youth there. But thank you very much for an enlightening talk. You're always welcome. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's been wonderful wherever you are in the world. Yeah, join us again next week.